Hitler's menacing presence cast a dark veil across Europe, while his military apparatus consumed whole countries. Yet beneath the surface of his own trusted advisors, treachery festered in hidden recesses. Critical personalities within Nazi leadership covertly plotted, attempting to undermine the authority and dominance of their supreme leader. However, disloyalty within the Reich carried deadly stakes. Hitler's administration was notorious for its savage brutality and complete lack of mercy toward those who deviated from their worldview. Those who turned against the regime encountered horrifying punishments, spanning from immediate trials to spectacular public killings, with their destinies often serving as terrifying warnings for anyone else contemplating acts of treason. The savage destiny awaiting Hitler's betrayers would therefore manifest as a stark truth, a sinister testament to the price of opposing the Reich. Treachery at the empire's core. The anti-Hitler conspiracy. The July 20th, 1944. Plot, alternatively recognized as the Wolf's Lair assassination endeavor, represented a daring initiative to terminate the Führer's existence and dismantle the Nazi government. Central to this scheme were individuals of integrity and patriotic fervor, though some possessed more intricate and dubious motivations. The unquestioned commander of this conspiracy was Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, a German military officer who had determined that Hitler required elimination to rescue Germany from complete catastrophe. Stauffenberg enlisted additional high-ranking commanders, including General Friedrich Olbricht and General Ludwig Beck, in his mission to eliminate the Führer and seize governmental control. On July 20th, 1944, Stauffenberg positioned an explosive device within a briefcase during a conference at the Führer's headquarters in Rastenburg, East Prussia. The subsequent detonation proved powerful, yet Hitler remarkably survived, sustaining only superficial wounds. Following the blast at the Führer's command center, the conspirators rapidly proclaimed Hitler's demise, hoping to generate chaos within Nazi leadership and gain time to strengthen their position. They mobilized troops faithful to their movement in strategic locations throughout Berlin and additional cities, while issuing detention warrants against prominent Nazi officials, including Joseph Goebbels. Internally, they sought to establish communication networks to coordinate their operations and remain informed about the evolving circumstances. Furthermore, they appealed for popular uprising, hoping to secure backing for their movement among German citizens and other powerful personalities. Nevertheless, the absence of verification regarding Hitler's death and the regime's swift, resolute reaction undermined their initiatives. The widespread confusion and coordination failures permitted forces loyal to the Führer to rapidly regain authority. Stauffenberg reached the Bendler Block intending to coordinate the coup's remaining operations. Shortly following his arrival, Gestapo forces surrounded and detained them. As word of the assassination attempt circulated, the Gestapo, the dreaded Nazi security apparatus, initiated a ruthless pursuit to apprehend the conspirators. Some faced immediate arrest while others barely escaped. The search and seizure operations proved as methodical as they were vicious. Gestapo squads invaded residences, workplaces, and even clandestine refugees where the conspirators sought shelter. Violence and intimidation characterized these raids, with terrified families and entire neighborhoods consumed by dread. Once imprisoned, the conspirators endured nightmarish interrogations. The Gestapo employed every means, utilizing physical and psychological brutality to extract admissions and plot details. Beatings, electrical torture, sleep denial, any technique was deemed acceptable in pursuing information. Some conspirators, overwhelmed by agony and terror, surrendered and confessed. They betrayed their associates and disclosed vital aspects of the scheme in desperate efforts to reduce their own torment. However, others demonstrated remarkable courage, withstanding the suffering in silence while protecting their comrades to the greatest extent possible. The proceedings amounted to little more than theatrical displays designed to justify the impending executions. Regime-controlled tribunals delivered guilty verdicts with unprecedented speed, condemning the conspirators to execution for sedition. The sentences received immediate implementation through public killings, conspirators, and their executions. The traitor's fate. As a principal orchestrator, Stauffenberg faced an expedited trial for treason. The process moved swiftly, and he received conviction for participating in the plot to assassinate Hitler and overthrow the Nazi government. The verdict was death, and on the identical day as the assassination attempt, July 20th, 1944, Klaus von Stauffenberg met his end before a firing squad in the Bendler Block courtyard, the Reserve Army headquarters in Berlin. Alongside him, several additional conspirators also perished that day in retaliation for their participation in the scheme. Lieutenant and aide de camp to Klaus von Stauffenberg, Werner von Haeften, also collaborated alongside his superior, coordinating logistics and ensuring all elements were positioned for the assassination attempt's critical moment. On the day of the operation, von Haeften accompanied Stauffenberg to the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, where Hitler conducted a staff conference. He transported the briefcase containing the explosive intended to eliminate the Nazi dictator. As Stauffenberg's aide-de-camp, von Haeften possessed intimate knowledge of the site's procedures and protocols, enabling Stauffenberg to position the bomb-laden briefcase beneath the conference table without raising suspicion. After the explosive detonated, Stauffenberg and Werner von Haeften returned to Berlin, to the Bendler Block, the German resistance's operational center. Once at the Bendler Block, Nazi authorities, alerted to the assassination attempt, began apprehending the conspirators. Von Haeften, being a close collaborator and aide-de-camp to Stauffenberg, numbered among those detained. Nazi security forces, including Gestapo members, raided and captured the conspirators at the location where they had orchestrated the coup against Hitler. He subsequently underwent an expedited trial for treason and received a death sentence. Haeften met his end in the Bendler Block courtyard alongside Stauffenberg, where much of the coup's organization had occurred, executed by firing squad. However, Stauffenberg and von Haeften were not the sole perpetrators of the assassination attempt against Hitler. Other significant officers and civilians, such as Henning von Tresckow, also participated. Von Tresckow joined the resistance movement after witnessing Nazi brutalities in the Soviet Union during the German invasion. Convinced of the necessity to overthrow Hitler, he began actively conspiring against him, becoming one of the July 20th plot's chief architects. Fearing retribution, Tresckow attempted to conceal his involvement in the plot, but his participation was uncovered as the Gestapo intensified their investigations. Tresckow realized his capture was imminent. Finally, to avoid apprehension and inevitable execution, Tresckow chose to end his own life on July 21, 1944. One day following the failed attempt, he committed suicide on the Russian front by consuming a cyanide capsule. As a German general and former chief of the German Army General Staff, Ludwig Beck served as one of the primary conspirators in the July 20th plot. Beck's reputation and position within the army proved instrumental in the conspiracy's planning and coordination. His military expertise and authority among senior officers helped secure support for the conspiracy within German army ranks. Additionally, Beck had been a vocal critic of Hitler and his military strategy, making him a natural leader for those seeking regime change. Beck's involvement in the plot encompassed preparing military plans to ensure governmental control following Hitler's assassination and coordinating the conspirators' actions within the army. He faced arrest shortly after the failed assassination attempt and confronted an expedited trial conducted by the Nazi judicial system. Before facing trial, Beck chose to end his own life, preferring death over confronting humiliation and torture at his captor's hands. Friedrich Olbricht, a general in the German army and chief of the General Staff of the Reserve Army at the time, played a vital role in the conspiracy to assassinate Adolf Hitler on July 20, 1944. As the primary coordinator of military actions within Germany once Hitler was eliminated, Olbricht was assigned with implementing Operation Valkyrie, a contingency plan originally conceived for internal control during civil unrest, but modified by the conspirators to execute the coup. Under Operation Valkyrie, reserve units under Olbricht's command would receive false orders regarding supposed rebellions or natural disasters, leading them to occupy strategic positions in Berlin and other key cities. This maneuver would secure governmental control and facilitate the arrest of Nazi leaders once Hitler was eliminated. Following the failure of the July 20th assassination attempt, Friedrich Olbricht was arrested at the Bendler Block, the Reserve Army headquarters in Berlin, where much of the coup's planning had been coordinated. His arrest marked the beginning of a series of conspirator arrests by Nazi authorities. Once in custody, he was summarily tried by a Nazi military tribunal. He was found guilty of treason for his participation in the plot to assassinate Hitler and overthrow the Nazi regime. The sentence was death, and on July 21, 1944, Friedrich Olbricht was executed by firing squad in the Bendler Block courtyard, along with other conspirators, including the plot's leader Klaus Stauffenberg. Karl Friedrich Goerdeler, another significant conspirator in the July 20th, 1944 assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler, played a crucial role in the internal resistance against the Nazi regime. Goerdeler, a conservative and former mayor of Leipzig, had maintained a firm stance against Hitler's dictatorial policies and his regime long before the war erupted. His involvement in the plot not only included conceiving the plan to assassinate Hitler, but also preparing to establish a provisional government after the coup's success. Given his political and administrative experience as former mayor of Leipzig and a former member of the German government, Goerdeler was considered for a prominent role in the future provisional government. He was expected to occupy a significant position, possibly that of chancellor, in the new government that would be formed after Hitler's overthrow. His political vision and commitment to democratic values made him a central figure in the plans for Germany's reconstruction after the fall of the Nazi regime. On the day of the assassination attempt, Goerdeler was detained by the Gestapo, the feared secret police of the Nazi regime, on the same day as the failed assassination attempt on the Führer. Following his arrest, Goerdeler was subjected to interrogations and torture by the Gestapo in an attempt to obtain information about other conspirators and details of the plot. However, he remained steadfast in his convictions and refused to disclose information that could compromise his fellow conspirators. After a brief summary trial, Goerdeler was sentenced to death for treason on August 8, 1944. Despite efforts by his supporters to save him, including international influence, the sentence was carried out on February 2, 1945. He was finally executed by hanging in Plötzensee prison in Berlin. Erwin von Witzleben surfaced as a distinguished personality in the assassination endeavor against Adolf Hitler on July 20, 1944. As a senior general in the Wehrmacht, he concluded that Hitler's elimination was essential for Germany's future and European peace. His status within the German army made him a vital element for the planned coup's success. Witzleben was designated to command the military forces that would assume control of Berlin following Hitler's assassination. With his vast experience and respect within the army, his backing was essential to ensure cooperation and effective plan execution. Together with other conspirators, he collaborated closely to coordinate the scheme and ensure military forces were prepared to act rapidly once Hitler was eliminated. On the day of the assassination attempt, Witzleben was ready to fulfill his assigned role in the coup. However, when the plan collapsed and the bomb planted by Klaus von Stauffenberg failed to kill Hitler, the Gestapo, the feared secret police of the Nazi regime, moved swiftly to arrest the conspirators. Witzleben was detained by the Gestapo on the same day as the attempt. Following his arrest, he underwent interrogations and an expedited trial for treason. Given his high military position and prominent involvement in the plot, he received a death sentence on August 8, 1944. The sentence was executed swiftly, and on August 8, 1944, Erwin von Witzleben was executed by hanging in Plötzensee prison in Berlin. The figure of Helmuth James Graf von Moltke stands out not only for his distinguished career as a jurist, but also for his bravery and dedication to the German resistance against the Nazi regime. Although he did not participate directly in the planning or execution of the July 20, 1944 assassination attempt against Hitler, his role in the contact network and his influence within the resistance connected him to the plot. It is important to note that Moltke did not share the perspective of some of his fellow conspirators who advocated for violent methods to overthrow Hitler. Instead, he and his group of intellectuals and aristocrats, known as the Kreisau Circle, advocated for nonviolent resistance based on ethical and moral principles. Moltke was a fervent proponent of the idea of a new democratic and humanitarian order for Germany after the fall of the Nazi regime. However, his position of opposition to the regime and his political activities placed him in the crosshairs of the Nazi authorities. Following the failure of the July 20th assassination attempt, regime security forces intensified their efforts to dismantle any form of internal resistance. Moltke was arrested by the Gestapo on January 19, 1944, before the assassination attempt, in connection with his participation in subversive activities against the regime. During his detention, Moltke was subjected to interrogations and summary trials, facing accusations of treason and conspiracy against the state. Finally, on January 11, 1945, He was sentenced to death by the Nazi People's Court in an unjust and biased judicial process a few months after the assassination attempt. On January 23, 1945, Helmuth James Graf von Moltke was executed by hanging in Plötzensee prison in Berlin. Hans Oster, a high-ranking officer in the Abwehr, the German military intelligence agency, played a crucial role in the organization and execution of the plot against Hitler. His influence and knowledge within the Abwehr made him one of the primary organizers of the July 20, 1944 assassination attempt, working closely with other conspiracy leaders like Klaus von Stauffenberg and Friedrich Olbricht. Oster significantly contributed to the planning and coordination of the plan to assassinate Hitler and overthrow the Nazi regime. As an expert in military intelligence, Oster provided crucial logistical and intelligence support for the plot. He facilitated communication between the conspirators, ensuring that the attack details remained secret and that operations were carried out effectively. His position within the Abwehr also gave him access to resources and military personnel used in the attempt to overthrow the Nazi regime. Although Oster was not directly involved in the physical execution of the assassination attempt, his participation was fundamental to the organization and success of the plan. His experience and strategic skills were invaluable in ensuring that the assassination attempt was carried out with the utmost precision and effectiveness. After the failure of the July 20th attack, Oster was arrested by Nazi authorities and subjected to interrogations and torture by the Gestapo, the regime's feared secret police. The Gestapo was determined to obtain information about the conspiracy and other potential conspirators and used brutal methods to extract information from Oster. However, despite extreme pressure, Oster remained steadfast in his loyalty to the cause and refused to reveal details that could incriminate his fellow conspirators. Eventually, Oster was tried for treason in a Nazi military court and sentenced to death. He was executed by hanging on April 9, 1945, just weeks before the end of World War II. His execution took place in Plötzensee prison in Berlin. Fritz Dietloff von der Schulenburg, a diplomat and retired officer in the German army, was driven to join the internal resistance against the Nazi regime due to his deep concerns about the direction Germany was taking under Hitler's leadership. As someone with extensive experience and a privileged perspective on international affairs, Schulenburg witnessed firsthand the damage and destruction caused by the regime's aggressive and brutal policies. Convinced of the need to halt the march toward the abyss, Schulenburg became one of the key conspirators in the plot to eliminate Hitler and overthrow the Nazi regime. His active participation in the planning and organization of the July 20, 1944 assassination attempt reflects his unwavering commitment to the cause of freedom and justice. In addition to providing logistical and moral support to his fellow conspirators, Schulenburg used his influence and diplomatic connections to seek the backing of foreign powers in case of the plot's success, demonstrating a strategic vision and commitment to the cause beyond Germany's borders. However, after the plot's failure, German security forces launched an intense search for the conspirators. Schulenburg was quickly identified as a participant in the plan and arrested without delay. Subjected to interrogations by the Gestapo, the Nazi secret police, Schulenburg bravely resisted the pressure and torture designed to extract information about the conspiracy and other potential conspirators. Despite the brutality and coercion he faced, Schulenburg remained steadfast in his commitment to his ideals and refused to betray other members of the group. However, justice under the Nazi regime was relentless. After being tried for treason in a Nazi military court, Schulenburg was sentenced to death on August 10, 1944, just weeks after the assassination attempt. He was executed by hanging in Plötzensee prison in Berlin. Hans Gisevius, a German civilian official and member of the resistance movement against the Nazi regime, played a crucial role during the July 20th assassination attempt. Gisevius, who worked in the Reich Ministry of the Interior, was involved in the conspiracy from its early stages. He used his position to facilitate logistics and communication between the conspirators, as well as to provide internal information about troop movements and Hitler's plans. On the day of the assassination attempt, Gisevius was not present at the Wolf's Lair in Rastenburg, where the assassination attempt took place. However, he played a crucial role in the events following the plan's failure, helping to coordinate the escape of some conspirators and contributing to the dissemination of information about the resistance both within and outside Germany. After the failed attempt, Gisevius went underground until January 23, 1945, when he escaped to Switzerland using a passport that had belonged to Clarita von Trott, sister-in-law of German Count Helmuth James von Moltke. Josef Wirmer, a prominent jurist and active member of the German resistance against the Nazi regime, played a crucial role during the July 20th assassination attempt. Wirmer, known for his integrity and commitment to justice, joined the circle of conspirators led by Colonel Stauffenberg in their attempt to overthrow Hitler. As part of the conspiracy, Wirmer contributed his legal and political skills to plan and execute the assassination attempt. However, the attempt failed when the bomb placed by Stauffenberg did not kill Hitler in East Prussia. After the failed coup, Wirmer was arrested by the Gestapo on August 4, 1944. Subjected to interrogations and torture, Wirmer remained steadfast in his loyalty to the resistance cause and refused to betray his fellow conspirators. Later, on September 8, 1944, Josef Wirmer was summarily tried by a Nazi court and sentenced to death for treason. 2 hours after the sentence, he was executed by hanging in Plötzensee prison in Berlin. In September 1943, Colonel Albrecht Merz von Quernheim became involved in the plot to assassinate Hitler and was one of the principal architects of Operation Valkyrie, contributing his organizational and military skills to ensure the plan's success. After the July 20th assassination attempt, von Quernheim acted swiftly to try to activate Operation Valkyrie and take control of the government. As a captain in the Abwehr, Ludwig Gera was part of a group whose purpose was to overthrow the Nazi regime and end the war. This resistance circle included notable figures such as Wilhelm Canaris, General Ludwig Beck, Hans Oster, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, as well as Gera himself. Gera was aware of the preparations to assassinate Hitler under Henning von Treschow by March 1943. However, his involvement in the resistance led to his arrest by the Gestapo in March 1944, following the arrest of Helmuth James Graf von Moltke in January of the same year. Despite his capture, Gera managed to escape and remained in hiding for some time. After the failure of the assassination attempt on Hitler on July 20, 1944, Gera became a target of the Gestapo's intense manhunt. Along with his wife, he stayed hidden for several weeks, receiving additional refuge from brothers Hans and Otto John. However, facing imminent capture by the Gestapo on November 2nd, Gera made the heartbreaking decision to shoot his wife and then attempt to take his own life. Although he survived his wounds, he was captured and subsequently imprisoned in several concentration camps. On April 9, 1945, Gera was hanged at the Flossenburg concentration camp, along with other prominent conspirators such as Wilhelm Canaris, Hans Oster, Karl Sack, and Theodor Strunk. The lawyer and German resistance worker Theodor Strunk initially sympathized with National Socialism, but later opposed the regime due to its seizure of power and subsequent decline of the rule of law. In 1937, he became a Hauptmann in the German Reserve Forces, working in the Wehrmacht section of Amt Ausland, Jütz Abwehr under Hans Oster. He came into contact with Karl Goerdeler and organized meetings of German resistance members in his own home. For his participation in the July 20th, 1944 plot, Theodor Strunk was arrested on August 1st, dishonorably discharged from the army on August 24th, and sentenced to death by the People's Court presided over by Roland Freisler on October 10th. He was then imprisoned at the Flossenburg concentration camp, where he, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Wilhelm Canaris, Ludwig Gera, Hans Oster, and Karl Sack were executed together by hanging on April 9, 1945. The hunt for traitors. The Gestapo's relentless pursuit. The Nazi regime's secret police, the Gestapo, led by Heinrich Müller, was infamous for its brutality and efficiency in suppressing dissent. After the July 20th assassination attempt, the Gestapo intensified its efforts to uncover the responsible parties and all those involved in the conspiracy to eliminate Adolf Hitler. Following Klaus von Stauffenberg and other conspirators' attempt to kill Hitler at his Wolf's Lair headquarters, the Gestapo embarked on a frenzied hunt to dismantle the conspiracy and capture everyone implicated. To track down the conspirators, the Gestapo employed a variety of methods ranging from brutal interrogation to intensive surveillance and thorough investigation. Suspects were subjected to beatings, sleep deprivation, starvation, and other forms of torture to extract information about the conspiracy. The interrogators did not hesitate to use ruthless methods to obtain names, connections, and details about the plot. In addition to interrogations, the Gestapo conducted raids on homes, offices, and military quarters in search of conspirators. These raids were sudden and carried out across the country. Mass arrests were common, and anyone suspected of being connected to the conspiracy was detained, including family members and associates of known conspirators. Investigation was also crucial in the hunt for conspirators. The Gestapo examined correspondences, financial records, and any other evidence that could reveal links to the German resistance or foreign organizations. They left no stone unturned in identifying everyone involved in the plot. They also used surveillance as a tactic, intensifying monitoring of suspected individuals, using wiretaps and other methods to track their activities. The focus was not only on the main conspirators, but also on their associates and anyone who might be connected to them. However, the most effective method for their investigations was the extensive network of informants and infiltrated agents who gathered information on potential conspirators. These informants operated in various social circles and organizations, including the army, the aristocracy, and resistance groups. Often, these informants provided crucial information about the movements and activities of the conspirators, helping the Gestapo locate and arrest them. The Justice of Terror, Roland Freisler, and the hunt for traitors in the Third Reich. Roland Freisler was a prominent jurist and Nazi official during the Third Reich. In 1933, he was appointed Secretary of State for the Prussian Ministry of Justice of the German Reich. By 1942, his loyalty and dedication to the National Socialist Party allowed him to rise through the administration, eventually becoming the president of the People's Court, Volksgerichtshof, a special tribunal established by the Nazi regime to try cases of treason, political dissent, and other offenses considered enemies of the state. Upon obtaining this position, he was granted almost unlimited power over the country's judicial system. As president of the People's Court, Freisler had absolute control over political trials, which frequently resulted in death sentences. It is estimated that at least 90% of the sentences handed down by his court ended in executions. Under his leadership, the court became a powerful tool for political repression. Freisler used his position to conduct summary trials and swift judicial processes, where legal guarantees and the rights of the accused were largely ignored in favor of the regime's political agenda. One of the darkest and most notorious moments of his career as president of the People's Court in the Third Reich came after the failed assassination attempt on Hitler on July 20th, 1944. The accused were military officers and civilians. Freisler took charge of directing the trials against the conspirators, displaying even more intense Nazi ferocity and fanaticism than usual. He saw the trials as an opportunity to send a clear message of unyielding loyalty to the Nazi regime and to publicly punish those who defied Hitler's authority. His goal was not only to condemn the accused, but also to publicly humiliate and discredit them to intimidate other potential dissidents. During the trials, Freisler behaved extremely aggressively and ruthlessly towards the accused, showing little respect for legal formalities and procedural guarantees. He interrogated the accused in a hostile manner, insulted and belittled them, seeking to demonstrate his moral and political superiority over them. The judicial proceedings were swift and the sentences predictable. The vast majority of the accused was sentenced to death. Freisler did not allow any effective defense by the accused and did not tolerate any show of remorse or regret. For him, these trials were an opportunity to reaffirm the regime's authority and eliminate any potential threat against it. The climax of these trials came with the summary executions of many of the accused, including the plot leaders like Klaus von Stauffenberg and other high-ranking officers. Freisler witnessed these executions with a mix of satisfaction and contempt, viewing them as an act of justice against those who dared to challenge the Nazi regime. Roland Freisler died during an Allied bombing in Berlin on February 3, 1945. At the time, he was presiding over a trial in the People's Court. During the hearing, an Allied air raid struck Berlin, hitting important government buildings, including the one housing the People's Court. The bombing was so sudden and devastating that the courtroom could not be evacuated in time. Freisler, along with others present in the building, was trapped under the rubble when the building was hit by a bomb. It is said that Freisler was found dead under a column with a case file in his hand. In the months that followed Operation Valkyrie's collapse, Nazi Germany's political and military environment plunged into a condition of disorder and suspicion. This era was characterized by a succession of betrayals and conspiracies that rocked the foundations of Hitler's administration. Within this upheaval, influential personalities were drawn into an intricate web of questionable allegiances and unrestrained personal ambitions. Many individuals within the party abruptly found themselves under examination. Military commanders, politicians, and civilians whose destinies became intertwined in a whirlwind of scheming and challenging choices. Some of them, like senior military officers and important political figures whose connections to the Führer were deeply established, found themselves ensnared as the war was already lost. Consequently, generals in Hitler's inner circles began prioritizing their own survival, even if it meant disobeying and betraying the already deteriorating German leader. Members of Hitler's close associates became entangled in a struggle for power and survival amid the regime's collapse. Internal rivalries and palace conspiracies became routine as each individual fought to secure their position among the ruins. Additionally, there were those who emerged as dissenting voices within the Nazi state apparatus, openly challenging the regime's policies and actively seeking its downfall. High-ranking German army officers, unmasked traitors. Among those affected by the aftermath of the July 20th assassination attempt, the most notable was German General Erwin Rommel, known as the Desert Fox, who was indirectly implicated in the plot against Hitler due to his supposed association with some of the Valkyrie conspirators. Although he did not actively participate in the planning or execution of the plot, rumors suggested that Rommel was aware of the activities of some conspirators and maintained contacts with them. One aspect linking Rommel to the Valkyrie plot was his position in the German army and his prestige among the military. As one of the most respected and admired generals of the Wehrmacht, his eventual support for regime change would have been crucial for the conspiracy's success. Additionally, Rommel had certain reservations about Hitler's leadership and voiced criticisms about his wartime direction, making some conspirators consider the possibility of gaining his support. However, there is no solid evidence that Rommel was directly involved in the plot. Although he met some conspirators in the past and might have known about their activities, there are no conclusive proofs of his active participation in Operation Valkyrie. Despite this, his presumed sympathy for regime change was enough to make him a suspect and later a target of Nazi reprisals. Due to his status and popularity, Rommel was treated differently. He was offered the option to take cyanide to avoid a public trial that could tarnish his reputation and instead was promised an honorable state funeral. On October 14, 1944, Rommel was visited by two Wehrmacht officers at his home in Herrlingen. He was given the choice to face a public trial for his alleged involvement in the plot or to take his own life. Faced with this difficult decision, Rommel chose the latter. Shortly after, his death was officially announced as resulting from wounds suffered in an Allied air raid in France. Heinrich Himmler, one of the closest Nazi leaders to Adolf Hitler, held the positions of Reichsführer SS, Chief of German Police, and Reich Minister of the Interior until April 29, 1945. As Germany's defeat became inevitable, Himmler began exploring the possibility of negotiating secretly with the Western Allies to seek a more favorable surrender for himself and other Nazi leaders. Towards the end of the war, Himmler maintained secret contacts with representatives of the Western Allies, such as Count Folke Bernadotte of Sweden and Baron Ernst von Weizsäcker of Switzerland. These clandestine negotiations sought a surrender of Germany to the Western Allies, hoping to avoid Soviet occupation and obtain a more lenient deal for the Nazi leaders. As Himmler was particularly interested in securing his own survival and that of other party leaders, he knew that if Germany fell into Soviet hands, the vengeance would be ruthless and he faced the possibility of being tried for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Therefore, he sought a selective surrender to preserve his life and that of other Nazi leaders. However, these secret negotiations were discovered by Adolf Hitler in April 1945. Hitler considered these actions an unforgivable betrayal, viewing surrender as a sign of weakness and preferring total destruction over capitulation. Consequently, he dismissed Himmler from all his positions, expelling him from the Nazi Party and the government. After being dismissed by Adolf Hitler in April 1945 and subsequently expelled from the Nazi Party and government, Himmler tried to disguise his identity and escape the imminent German defeat. He disguised himself with a false identity as a sergeant in the Prussian forces and tried to blend in with German refugees fleeing north. However, he was identified and arrested by British forces during a routine inspection at a checkpoint. Once captured, Himmler was correctly identified and taken into British custody. However, before he could be interrogated or face any trial for his crimes, Himmler decided to take his own life. On May 23, 1945, a day after his capture, Himmler committed suicide by swallowing a cyanide capsule hidden in his mouth. The capsule had been provided by British intelligence, who had instructed soldiers to conduct thorough searches to prevent Nazi prisoners from committing suicide. Despite these measures, Himmler managed to consume the poison before being stopped. With the Red Army advancing from the east and approaching Berlin, the Reich's capital, Hitler, facing the reality of defeat, decided he preferred to die rather than fall into enemy hands. On April 22, 1945, in the Führer bunker in Berlin, Hitler revealed his decision to commit suicide to his closest collaborators, including one of the regime's most prominent leaders, Hermann Göring. At that time, Göring, aware of the Nazi regime's inevitable fall, decided to act accordingly. The commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, in a move interpreted by Hitler as betrayal, sent a telegram to the Führer asking for permission to assume control of the Reich if Hitler could no longer govern. In his message, Göring claimed he was acting in the country's best interest and that his goal was to ensure an orderly transition of power at a critical moment for Germany. However, Hitler saw the telegram as an attempt by Göring to usurp his authority and take control of the country. In response, he stripped Göring of all his positions and titles, expelled him from the Nazi Party, and ordered his arrest. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, Hermann Göring was captured by Allied forces. Göring tried to evade capture and fled to southern Germany. However, on May 6, 1945, he surrendered to U.S. troops near Radstadt, Bavaria. He was arrested and placed under Allied custody. After his capture, Göring was charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity, and was one of the main defendants in the Nuremberg trials, an international military tribunal established to prosecute Nazi leaders. During the trials, he was sentenced to death, and on October 15, 1946, a day before his scheduled execution, Hermann Göring avoided the gallows by taking a hidden cyanide capsule. He died in his cell at the Nuremberg prison. In early 1945, the situation in Germany was desperate, with the country on the brink of total collapse and Allied forces advancing rapidly from the west and east. Hitler retreated to his bunker in Berlin, aware that the battle for the city would be the final battle of the war. Meanwhile, Hermann Fegelein, an SS officer and brother-in-law of Eva Braun, Hitler's wife, abandoned his post in the Führer bunker, apparently determined not to partake in what he saw as a suicidal pact. Peter Hugel, deputy commander of the Reich Security Service, was sent to search for Fegelein. He was found in his Berlin apartment preparing to flee to Sweden or Switzerland. He was arrested and found in possession of a significant amount of cash and jewelry, some belonging to Eva Braun. Additionally, documents were discovered implicating Heinrich Himmler's attempts at peace negotiations with the Western Allies. When Hitler learned of these events, he became enraged and ordered Himmler's arrest, sensing a connection between Fegelein's disappearance and Himmler's betrayal. Fegelein was brought back to the Führer bunker, where he was interrogated about Himmler's plans. Due to Fegelein's refusal to cooperate and his drunken state, Hitler ordered that he be stripped of his rank and transferred to a combat group to prove his loyalty in battle. However, Fegelein's death is shrouded in discrepancies. Some accounts suggest he was executed in the garden of the Reich Chancellery on April 28th, while others claim he was subjected to a court-martial and subsequently executed by a member of the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler the same night. In September 1943, Hannah Solf, widow of Wilhelm Solf, minister of the colonies under Kaiser Wilhelm II and former German ambassador to Japan, was implicated in the Solf Circle, an anti-Nazi intellectual movement in Berlin. During a tea party hosted by Hannah Solf, a new member, a doctor named Paul Rexe, who turned out to be a Gestapo agent, was included in the inner circle. This unfortunate event led to the downfall of the German military intelligence organization Abwehr, along with the head of German army intelligence, Wilhelm Canaris. Members of the Solf Circle fled, but all were captured on January 12, 1944, and executed, except for Hannah Solf and her daughter. Among the dead was Otto Kiep, who had connections with the Abwehr. The couple Erich Vermehren and Elisabeth Vermehren, both Abwehr agents assigned to Istanbul, were urgently summoned to the Gestapo office in Berlin. Fearing for their lives, they defected to the British. The Nazis mistakenly believed that the Abwehr's intelligence codes had been handed over to the Allies. Himmler promptly informed Hitler, who had already lost trust in Canaris. On February 18th, The Abwehr's activities were ordered to end, and Canaris was relegated to a second-rate position in the Ministry of Propaganda. This deprived the Prussian conspirators of their own intelligence, but accelerated plans to eliminate Hitler. After the failed assassination attempt on Hitler in July 1944, Canaris was personally detained by Walter Schellenberg of the SS and placed under house arrest. Himmler, his enemy, persuaded Hitler to execute him. Canaris was taken to Flossenburg concentration camp, where he was humiliated by SS guards. In a military tribunal presided over by Otto Thorbeck of the SS, Canaris was sentenced to death alongside other conspirators, including General Hans Oster, General Karl Sack, Ludwig Gera, and Pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was executed by hanging on April 9, 1945 by SS guards, and his body was cremated. His subordinates, Erwin Lahausen and Hans Bernd Gisevius, testified at the Nuremberg trials about Canaris's opposition to Hitler. Lahausen reported a conversation between Canaris and General Wilhelm Keitel, in which he warned Keitel that the German army was responsible for atrocities in Poland, to which Keitel responded that they were Hitler's orders. Keitel was sentenced to hang at Nuremberg.